continue straight on, and we're going to jump into, as I talked about back in, if you remember, January, said that I was going to do something with you called the parallel curriculum model. I told all of you, a majority of you said you were not familiar with the parallel curriculum model. If you are familiar with it, bear with me. But we're going to extend that into using AI, using artificial intelligence to help us effectively operate our classrooms. You know, sort of learning about how do we best operate in an age of artificial intelligence. So when we talk about what's the problem in our modern classrooms, if you remember back in September, Sally Reese did a bunch of research and she found that in the modern American classroom, we have kids who are reading 10 plus years different, right? You have fifth grade classroom, you have kids reading at a kindergarten level, you have kids reading at a high school level. It's the same in mathematics. I've spent a lot of time in our, algebra classrooms and our middle school math classrooms, and I've seen kids who don't understand addition. I've seen kids who don't understand what, like basic numbers, count from 1 to 20, starting anywhere in between, things that we have kids who are 12, 13 can't do. Vice versa, I've been in kindergarten classrooms. I had a student at Neptune many years ago who was sitting in the front office about to get suspended. And while he was there, we had learned addition, and he was like, I bet if you were to do addition vertically, like 1, 2 plus 2 makes 4, you could also do it horizontally. So if I did 2 and 2 is 4, and then 4 and 4, and I brought those together, I would make 16. And figured out how to make arrays on his own, just talking to himself in the middle of, waiting to get in trouble. So it's really key for us to be masters at differentiation, to be able to adjust our lesson plans, both on the fly and in advance, to be able to address all of those various levels of kids' needs. Now, the best way to do that is with a series of ascending intellectual demand, to take where kids are and to increase the challenge to their level of need. So when we talk about the parallel curriculum model, it is built on this concept of ascending intellectual demand. Okay, we have multiple facets of the curriculum that we can escalate in various ways and match to the student's interests, to their learner profile, in order to best provide appropriate challenge, provide appropriate pacing. To do that, we need to increase the demand on their learning in sophistication and in the level of the challenge, okay? The goal of this is to remove the ceiling for our lesson plans in order to challenge our students' thinking. So you got to be thinking right now, how can I manage that in a classroom with 20 or more students, right? That seems incredibly challenging. The PCM is a way to do that. Just continuing on that, I can't tell you how frustrated I am that my L got moved down a level. But so if you keep seeing me like turn sideways, it's just that ADHD. So the parallel curriculum model, built on ascending intellectual demand, it follows a logical sequence of challenge that makes sense to the learner. That is a real key aspect of the PCM. We want to build them up in various ways. And I'm giving you the background. This is the why behind it, but almost this entire session is going to focus on the how, okay? We want to facilitate student progression towards expertise. We want to think of learning as a continuum with no final destination. That's something that you hopefully have been hearing from us for 2 years now, but that idea that we keep learning, there's no ceiling to that. If a kid masters a standard, that's cool. There's another set of standards. If a kid masters all K-12 standards, that's cool. There's another set of standards beyond that. When does it terminate? Okay, in the American education system, that's your doctorate. That's why we call it a terminal degree. That's when you finish your standard. So I will give you permission, if any of your elementary kids get their doctorate while they're with you, you can stop following this. Man, I kind of expected some laughs at that, but so, and then we want to move the learner from a novice to an apprentice to a practitioner to an expert. So the parallel curriculum model has this built in. That was a lot of the what we need, but here's the how, okay? It eliminates repetition for students who've already mastered content. One of the biggest issues that we have with our high ability learners, even our on grade level learners, is that, Miss, I already know this, right? Oh, didn't we already do this? Oh, well, I'm so glad you remember because you're the only one. The parallel curriculum model gives you something to do with that student. It can be used for acceleration. It can also be used for enrichment. It allows you to focus your time on the students who don't yet have mastery. There's a reason the parallel curriculum model came out after the push for No Child Left Behind. You know, American education system, if you're going back to like 1890, we really said, who are the most proficient learners, and let's spend time with them to increase. That continues through to the whole Sputnik revolution, A Nation at Risk. We have that idea that advanced learners, we really need to accelerate them. No Child Left Behind flips the thinking on that. We say we need a mandatory minimum, and we've got to ensure every single kid hits that level. And it is just a fact. It takes a lot more of our input, of our work, of our time to help those kids meet that minimum. So if you're going to find the time to do that without ignoring your high ability kids, you've got to find a different way of doing things for them. It used to break my heart when I would walk into classrooms as a gifted resource teacher and I would see, oh, well, Brittany, she's done. So I gave her social studies weekly. So, well, how many social studies weeklies? Well, I gave her 3 of them. How long is she going to do that for? Oh, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours every day for like, till my next unit. So the parallel curriculum model helps us get around that, and it provides choice for students. By the end of doing a PCM unit, you should have somewhere in the realm of 12 to 16 activities for a student to choose from. Now, when we talk about running the parallel curriculum model in your classroom, you're going to understand what this means in a minute, but a kid can work on any of the parallels. It is not a process where you say you're going to start here and go here and go here. It is much more built around the idea of you setting up an environment for a kid to work in, and then they choose what they do. And you want to release that control to your students in the PCM. If a kid says, well, I don't know what any of this means, you say, great, you've got access to more knowledge than any of your ancestors ever had, and it's one click away, and we pay for the internet and the power here. Good luck. But you are directing them through the process of engaging and learning in their own. Your kids, the first time you do this, I promise, they're going to struggle. And you might need to help them, but you want to help them with the aspect of self-directed learning, not with the content that the PCM is putting out. You want to help them with, how do you go find resources? We pay for Khan Academy for every kid in the district. If you're at a high school, next year, you're going to have Conmigo. You're going to have an AI paid for that all your kids have access to. ChatGPT, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Totally free if you're using 3.5. Next, the learner profile. So for the PCM to really sing in your classroom, you need to know your kid. You need to know, how do they like to work? What works best for them? What are they interested in? Interest is key. And don't deny any interest. If a kid tells you, look, the only thing I'm interested in is winning a victory royale in Fortnite, okay, great, I can work with that. The PCM, it's very easy to work with that. Baby steps are really important. Implement this at the lowest level. Start with one kid, start with one activity, and then go from there. You keep on this, you'll eventually become professional. When I go into a classroom, if I've got, you know, a day in advance and about an hour of my time, I can have one of these built for every single kid in the classroom that I'm going into for that day. If it's, you know, kids at every single level. But when you're starting, you want to pick one kid, pick one curriculum, and then pick and choose the pieces that work for you. This is going to be different every single time. When you are practicing this, I want you to learn the skill of building PCM units, not the unit itself is the product, okay? If you have, I made an absolutely fantastic unit for this one student who was like really into social justice around the Seminole tribe in Florida, and like making sure that, you know, they get paid back by the government basically for the crimes committed against them. And we did a whole PCM unit where we related everything that we went through in that class. We read Julius Caesar, we read Fahrenheit 451. Okay, this is all through that lens. That I could not give that to any other student. You know, if I had another student who's like, what's a Seminole? Isn't that a football team? That's not going to be effective. So focus on the skill of building these. And with that, we're going to talk about the PCM, the how-to. So the parallel curriculum model consists of 4 parallels, okay? You've already done one of them. Congratulations, it's already done. Good work. Pat yourself on the back. That is the core parallel. The core parallel is what you're already doing in your classroom. It could be your curriculum unit plans, it's whatever your learning activity is for the day. We're going to do a foldable, so make sure you each have a blank piece of paper. If you don't, raise your hand. Brittany can get one over to you. But that core parallel, you're thinking of what is the actual learning activity kids are doing. So it's not, oh, we're going to learn about, you know, Flagler and the trains in Florida. It's, we are going to read this story, you know, Flagler builds trains across Florida. Do we still read that anymore? Or very much remember that 4th grade? Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, my wife and I went to St. Augustine one time, and I was like spitting off all these Henry Flagler facts. How do you know this? It was a 4th grade use. It's a model listening activity. We have 3 other parallels. I'm going to go very deeply into these, but they are the connection parallel, the practice parallel, and the identity parallel. So if you want to write those down, core, connections, practice, and identity. We're not doing the foldable yet. I'll guide you through it when we get to it. But just, you know, remember those terms. A prerequisite to, oh, did you still need to see that? I'll wait. But yeah, this was always my struggle in the classroom. Like, you don't need to process, you got it immediately. The words came out of my mouth. Obviously, you understood.
You said that at 4th is the one you read?
Yeah, 4 is the one that you've already done. When you're implementing this in your classroom, a real key is to start with pre-assessments, okay? You need to know what your students know before you can do the PCM. When I operate a classroom and my students are trained in the parallel curriculum model, this is a skill for them as much as it is for you. They'll eventually be saying, oh, can I do a PCM on this? There's a form of curriculum compacting. Can I do this instead? I need to know, well, do you already know the thing that I'm teaching? We see this all the time. Parents come in and they say, my kid's ready for 2nd grade. They're like, well, your kid's in 1st grade. It's okay, they can go to 2nd grade. There's a bunch, and then we'll test those kids, and there's a bunch that they can do at the 2nd grade level, but there's also things that they've never seen. I say, okay, well, now let's test you on clocks. Do you know, an analog clock? And the kid goes, oh, I don't know what that is. Well, let's look at a digital clock. Can you read this? Like, oh, that's just a blind spot, something they haven't been taught for. I would not allow that student to opt out of that activity. I might compact it in the middle. Oh, yeah, you got it. You did 2 or 3 of the things. Now we can go do something else. But I would still need to introduce that topic to that student. Real key with gifted kids, remember, if you haven't taken nature and needs, gifted kids tend to learn things in 3 to 5 exposures, average students like 18 to 34 exposures. So a lot of times they can do much fewer things and understand it. When we're talking about a pre-assessment though, that does not mean you need to give a kid a test before every single standard. It does not mean you need to do a check for understanding before you start. It can be that. It can be your standardized assessment. It can also be like talking to your student in the form of a diagnostic. There's all sorts of ways you can diagnostically assess students. You can take anecdotal notes. I know, when Johnny was arguing with Belinda and he said, like, that's not fair. I gave you 2, then I gave you 2 more, and that's 4. And Belinda's like, oh, 1, 3, 4. You know that Johnny understands addition. Okay, you've got evidence. That is a form of pre-assessment. It can be interactive notebooks, well-framed questions, asking a student a very targeted question about the core concept of this. You're going to teach main idea next week. Ask Johnny the week before, what is the main idea of this thing we're doing right now? And, oh, I think it's this. And he's right. Okay, you know that next week, that activity where all the kids are going to reach into a brown paper bag and pull out sunglasses and sand and sunscreen and say, oh, I think the main idea is the beach. I know that's a little before theme, whatever. We can then do the parallel curriculum model there instead of the main task. Giving students think time. If you introduce something at the start of a class, if anyone does the sprinkle and shower method, that I'm going to sprinkle in the thing we're going to learn next week at the end of a lesson today, and a kid instantly understands it right then with no think time, you can do the PCM. Word association, mind maps, response logs, discussion, debates, exit slips, entrance slips, self-assessment, T-charts. We've got all sorts of ways that you can assess whether or not a kid has a core understanding. This does not need to be a grade in the grade book, okay? This just needs to be for you. Do you have evidence to say, yes, Brittany already understood this, okay? And if so, then we can go on to one of the parallel curriculums. So starting with that core curriculum, this is the what of your lesson. Oh, Siri, how long have you been listening to me? This is the what of your lesson. It is your foundation of learning. It's based on your standards. It is key facts, concepts, principles. It's what the whole class is going to do. In a non-differentiated classroom, this would be your whole lesson plan. This would be the thing that everyone is doing. When you introduce the PCM, it's only one part of what is happening in your class, and that's where we get the differentiation from. Content, assessments, learning activities, even extensions, if you're saying, oh, you did the main thing, but then take it one step further. If you ask ChatGPT to write you lesson plans, they'll always give you an extension, is a fun fact. But that's your core curriculum. Students who do not need enrichment or intervention will stay in this parallel the whole time. We, as a district, are getting pretty good at, this is what the whole class is doing. And I'm going to take my little group over here and we're going to do interventions. That is a form of a parallel curriculum, just not this PCM for gifted purposes. You have to understand your core activities in order to successfully implement the parallel curriculum model. So we're going to make a foldable now. Take your piece of paper, fold it in half again. Or you can do like the book and then fold in the book, you know, the origami book structure if you want, however you want, but make 4 vertical columns. On the top, I want you to put 4 headers, 4 connections, practice, and identity. What I want you to do in that 4 column on the left is to write down 3 things that you are going to be doing in the next few weeks. If you're in a unit right now, you can do 3 things you're doing this week. It could be something you're doing in the next few weeks, whatever. But I want you to get to like maybe 1-2 sentences. So for example, when I was in the classroom, I used to have to teach the tragedy of Julius Caesar. 3 of the activities that I did, we had to analyze Mark Antony's speech for its rhetorical arguments. The kids had to do an activity where they translated Shakespeare's English to modern English. They each got a scene, they had to translate, and then they shared the modern version of the play. And then they had to build a theme park to use literary devices to explain attractions. They would make like, oh, the betrayal around, and that's like stabs you in the back every time you spin. They were high schoolers, so they got very weird. But those are the 3 activities that I would do. So what I want you to write down and leave yourself like some big chunks of space in between them. You want to fill that whole column. 3, if you didn't, you can just, write it again. It's fine. But 3 activities, 3 things that you're going to be doing. Does anyone want to share one of the things that they're doing, one of their activities? Give me something to work with. Go ahead.
I'm a first grade teacher, so I do math and science. So last week my students has to be the task of using different kind of 2D shapes and 3D shapes. They have to identify and label the side, vertices, and edges of the 3D shapes, and the student has to describe the difference between 2 and 3D shapes in a real world.
Okay, so they're gonna build a castle with some of those blocks.
And
You have an activity where they need to explain the differences. Okay, it's good. I can very much imagine how you might have a kid who comes in and is like, oh, I love 3D shapes. That's one dimension lower than the fourth dimension. You're like, oh, how many vertices does a four-dimensional object have? Well, it really depends on how transitory it is between the dimensions.
How the data do a home,
Mhm.
how they do the thing.
Oh, sure. Oh, my three-dimensional game uses a bunch of polygons to create the optical illusion of 3D, even though it's only on a screen, which is 2D. And I've had that before. Do you want to share an activity? Either I pointed in a straight line, so anyone in the straight line.
So this kind of is related to our last unit. So analyze the impact the transcontinental railroad had on society or groups of people during this time. So then they would discuss and evaluate positive and negative impacts and then research, maybe like this time frame and groups of people that have been impacted and then make an advertisement to explain their understanding.
You make an advertisement. I like that.
Who would their audience be? Yeah. So
Okay. Like I said, y'all are already masters of the core curriculum. This is an example that a classroom teacher did who sent this to me. We'll look at this whole parallel, but her core activities were explain cause and effect in the relationship of events within your community, create a chart. This was an activity she was doing with, I believe, third graders. Read Ryan's well, create a cause and effect relationship and explain how the situation presented is different from yours. And then read Tsunamis and Hurricanes by Tim Brown, compare and contrast natural disasters. So that's the core parallel. And the next three parallels are going to be how we differentiate. The first one is the connections parallel. The parallel of connections asks students to connect their knowledge across disciplines, across subjects. The goal is to help students build bridges in their thinking. The parallel of connections works best when it's connected to topics that the kids are interested in. This is how you bring student interest in. This is also a really great strategy if you have that Eudora type. Remember the disaffected gifted kid who does not want to do your work because they think it's boring and it doesn't relate to them. This is how you can start to build that buy-in, is with this parallel. Think about connecting to things other than jobs or real world experiences, because that's the practice parallel. We want to talk about different times or time periods, different locations, cultures, events, people perspectives, arts or discipline, or can you think of any other things that you might connect to? Y'all can answer that if you want. What? Okay, we have culture, sure. Okay, hobbies, sure. So some things like this. What does a citizen look or act like in the past or future? How has storytelling been used as a social education tool in different eras? Why do we play dodgeball? Well, while we play dodgeball in the US, what do they play in other countries like China or Africa? Jill was here, she could probably tell me. She'd be like, oh no, they have dodgeball there too. I don't know. And then how is life for a student in Florida different during the Civil War, World War II? Those are connections across time, across cultures, places. The connection should be embedded within the learning activity that you are creating. Here are some things that teachers have actually done in Osceola County from various years. I've been doing this with teachers since 2015, so the past 9 years. Research current civil rights leaders in the US and the world. What are the I have a dream speeches of these causes? The teacher who did that actually did this like a week after Parkland, so it ended up being like the David Hoggan kind of stuff with that. How would your finances be different if you were a single woman in the 1950s? And for a lot of these things, like, adults are going to struggle with this. We want that for our gifted kids. We want that ascending intellectual demand. It's okay if they are challenged by it. If they totally don't respond, they shut down and they're not doing the work, we can find a different parallel. But a lot of times they're going to find some traction. And then these are the kids who are going to go and be like, oh my God, did you know that in 1950 this happened? Like, did you know that women didn't have the right to own their own credit card yet? Is that the 60s, right? It's been 60 years. So I had a student who went off on refrigerators. She was like, when he's learned all about refrigerators, it was something similar to this. And then she went, oh, I just learned about refrigerators. And did you know that if we could build a big enough refrigerator, we could solve global warming as long as we could make a pipe that was at least like 960 miles long to put the heat into space. Like, oh, okay, Lauren, you can have fun. She's a theoretical physicist now. This one. How did the development of measurement systems evolve into what it is today? You know, that's a great one because it'll ask kids, what's the difference between the metric system and the imperial system? Why did we get what a foot is? Well, it's based on some guy's foot way in the past. Use slope intercept form to explain whether Benji Fishy, Mr. Savage, or Laserbeam is the best Fortnite player and why. That was one that I actually did with a student at Flora Ridge in 2018. They were like, this kid only cares about Fortnite and he won't learn anything. He was a 5th grade student. I was like, I bet you we can make him learn stuff. And he was also he was like 4 years ahead in his mathematics. They were doing coordinate planes. So he ended up mapping out the win rate to play time and basically built a regression to say like, well, as long as they do more play time, here's why Benji Fishy has more wins per minute than any of the other students. Average size of a home in various countries. How is justice handled in the crucible? Compare and contrast. So here are my 4 activities that I did that Julius Caesar. Here's the connections parallel. Instead of analyzing the speech, they already have an understanding of this. I asked that student, write a rhetorical argument convincing the class that it's okay that you murdered someone. So see, now again, high schoolers, you're not gonna do that with 5th graders, but depends on how they say it. But that is what happens in the text, right? Mark Antony has just murdered Julius Caesar. He gets up on a stage and he says like, oh, the people, listen to me. This is all cool that I did this because he was a bad dude. And then at the end of it, all the people are like, yeah, no, you're totally right. Let's kill Brutus instead. So taking that activity, connecting it. Translate Shakespeare's English speech to modern speech. I had the student turn Caesar into a modern high school using current slang terms. He ended up writing this whole thing, the tragedy of Julius Tweetspear, and it was all like Twitter posts of what happened. He made different profiles for everyone, and Cassius was like, oh, dang, you just see what they did. I'm bad at high school slang, but it was very fun. Instead of building the theme park that uses literary devices, same thing, but every aspect had to relate back to betrayal. So I ascended the actual activity to be more demanding. What that 3rd grade teacher did, instead of explaining the cause and effect, they're going to go to Kissimmee.org and identify the services that will provided that enhance their community living. They're taking the learning and already applying it, connecting it to something else. And they're doing this activity instead of this activity. So that is going to be a much more intellectually demanding task.
So you would go to the ends, okay, your typical lesson plan would have an extension activity.
Yep.
And you would just kind of move to that extension connection.
No.
Connections.
No.
Okay.
You've got this piece of paper. You go up to the student and you say, Shelby, you already understand this. Today we're talking about cause and effect. I know you got it. Do you want to do what the class is doing? I'm not going to keep you out of it if you want to pair up and team. Or do you want to do any of these other 3 activities? Read them, tell me which one you want to do. I would recommend this one. I think it's going to be really fun for you because it's about your interests. And you're giving that student choice and agency, and then but in exchange, they have to have some agency. They have to be self-directed in what they're doing. You tell them like, I'm going to check in on you once or twice, but I will expect you to have done this. Now, when we get into having an AI build this for you at the end of the session, it will give the kid much more directed. You're going to do this, and this, and this. So you're not literally sending them into the mountains with a pickaxe and telling them to come back with gold. But this is a way of saying, look, I thought of you, and we got something else instead of me just telling you, look, I know you already got it. Just keep your hand. Don't you have something to read? Don't you want to read something? You know, that's those kind of things. And we do that a lot, all the time in our elementary classrooms and our middle school classrooms. That's what makes the high schoolers who come into our classrooms and they're like, do I need to be here? You know, I mean, that we hear that Harmony, the principal Harmony has talked to me about that pretty extensively. Like, what do I do when I have these kids? who are pretty proficient, they're in AP, and they say, well, I already proved it on Canvas, so why do I even need to come on your Canvas? Like, I mean, that's a pretty reasonable argument for a kid. As Randa's shaking her head, she's like, oh yeah, that's my kid. But having this kind of thing early on lets that it will help build your relationship with that student because they will know that you trust them to engage in their own learning, which is what a lot of these students need. But it's also going to give your class structure. This is not just saying, hey, you got time, go do something else. Oh, you answered these questions in 3 minutes? Great, you got back 42 minutes of your time. No, we still have a whole class thing. We're just giving them better. I tell my 2-year-old this all the time. You need better fuel. Yes, calories. She goes, but daddy, calories. Like, yeah, yes, okay. This chocolate does have calories, but they're not good calories. They're empty calories. Very hard to make a 2-year-old understand the difference between empty calories and full calories. Let's move in. Oh wait, sorry. What we're gonna do now is on your task, I just want you to make 1 or 2, not all 3. Make sure you leave the bottom one blank. Make 1 or 2 connections activities for the core activity you have. So if your core activity was you're going to build a castle using 2D and 3D shapes, your kid who already understands that, what are they going to do instead in that connections parallel, connecting different times, subjects, cultures, etc.? What's your instead of? And if you got questions, remember, I like that activity. I will just say with the word extension, this is not an extension of the task. This is an instead of. When you're operating this in your classroom, this should be, I recognize my kids already understand the stock market. Instead of that, you will do this thing. So instead of this and then extending into the next thing, you're just from the start, you're going to do this activity. Now, I will say, you should have some kind of evidence that the kid already has it. You don't want your principal to come in and say, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And you say, well, I felt like Davian understood it. That's not, I mean, I trust your intuition, but it's not good empirical evidence if we have to go talk to a parent. A parent's not going to accept if their kid fails the FSA and you say, well, I really thought they understood. Like, that's good. The parent's going to have a problem with you. So we need to have some evidence. Okay, we talked about all those diagnostics. Has everyone in here been into EduClimber? And I've said it 1,000 times. Good. Wow, got a lot of nods. We're at 800 people logging in a day now in Osceola, so it's about 1 out of every 4 teachers. If you're looking at a kid in EduClimber, on the left-hand side, there's a little thing that says upload documents. You can put any work that kids have done in. If a kid makes something, you can scan it with your document camera, you can upload it there. And then if anyone says, did this student understand it? You don't have to go to your file cabinet and find, oh, I'm pretty sure we did standard RL13 back in October. You can just pull up the document container. You have all the things there and you can leave comments on them. You can say, this was to Andrew showing me that he understood this standard. Okay, so I would recommend you, if you want, at the end of today, I can show you how to do that if that is a concern. But we've got that proof. This is the instead of. We're differentiating the students doing another task instead of. I will also say, with the connections parallel, ask your kids what they're interested in. If a kid is interested in trains, okay, great. Let me figure out something with trains. Cause and effect within your community of the Sunrail being installed to go from downtown Kissimmee to Disney is a proposal that they actually just floated yesterday. Write about that. What would the cause of a new Sunrail going to Disney be? What would the effect be? Similar tasks, similar learning outcomes, similar expectation, much more rigorous demand, because now it involves research, now it involves hypothesis, assumption testing, conjecture, things that, you know, if you're talking about a 2nd grader with that, that's going to be a lot more complex. The other thing that I really want to stress with these alternatives, parallel curriculums, they should be the same quantity of work. If you are asking the students to write 2 paragraphs, this should still be write 2 paragraphs. Now, chances are that little kid is gonna write you 2 pages. They're just gonna keep going because you found something they're interested in and they're being challenged. But we want the same minimum. It should not be, the class is gonna watch your video. You're gonna conduct a research paper, because that's when it starts to feel like punishment instead of opportunity.
What is the maximum of days that you recommend us to do that certain oral, lesson with them?
I trust you as an expert educator. You know, if you're moving on to a new standard and it's something like you still need the diagnostic, but if you've got a kid who's like, you know, I had this student named Nemesis in 2015, and she got on the pretest at the start of the year a literal perfect score for everything that I was going to be doing for the entirety of the year. She had a lot of these where she was like, Mr. I'm so interested in this. Can I just keep doing it? I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, you don't need to read Julius Caesar with us. Like, you're sitting there, you're working, you're producing, you're giving me really high quality work. You're getting stuff out of. I'm really helping most of this class understand the words that are being said, and they're mostly at the pace of reading a page a day. So like, yes. Oh, you want to go and read 900 pages tonight? Yep, we're gonna do this instead. She ended up reading the whole Wheel of Time series that year. It's like 12 books that had been out, and they were all 2,000 pages. And she did all these thematics. She's like, oh, I found this, that like, oh, this character, Randall Thor, is very similar to Julius Caesar. Can I just write about how like his betrayal in book 4 is very similar to Bruce? Yeah, go for it. But you do a pre-diagnostic and the kid doesn't have one of those standards, suddenly like, oh, you aren't, you know, you can't explain the author's purpose in this. You did a great job with theme, you did a great job with evidence. You can't tell me why the author wrote this. You got to come back and do this activity with the rest of us. And in that case, if they have an outstanding PCM activity, it should not overwrite your core learning. Mm-hmm.
Essentially, if I look at the, I know, if I look at the breakdown of standards, I could still give them something more like a question.
If a kid comes in level 5 on PM1, you should be going to your principal and advocating for them to be grade skipped. That means that kid scored in the 99th percentile. Well, level 5 is a 95th percentile on their end of year assessment for everything you're going to teach them that entire year. They scored considerably better than any students are going to after a year of learning. Like, that kid should be flexed into the next grade level. You're talking about 100% differentiating everything you do all the time for that student is going to be very difficult. And we had like 6 kids in Osceola County get a 5 on PM1. So level 4 is a little bit different. Level 4 is the 70th percentile, but in that case, you will probably be doing a lot of differentiating or a lot of ignoring the kid. It's, you know, your choice.
The math, I know you can do an online middle school course,
Mhm.
like in lieu of fifth grade, but for reading, you would recommend they would stay in that grade level because they were a 5.
You
It
mean,
depends on the kid.
you mean if they got a level 5 in reading but not in math? I mean, I would work with the kid and see what the gaps are. It's very difficult in our current educational structure to skip a kid from 5th to 6th grade. Just,
It doesn't matter if they do online middle school math,
Mhm.
then the fast or whatever the state tested at the time in their current grade level.
Yeah. I mean, you could look into advanced online reading courses. Doesn't necessarily need to be through OVS. You could look at what Khan has, a lot of those materials. A lot of times when you think about acceleration as a concept, as long as there's input, acceleration increases, right? If you're putting gas on your car goes faster and faster and faster until there's an equal or opposite force that stops it. Usually the brakes, sometimes a wall. It's the same thing with our kids, right? They're going to go faster and faster and faster if you give them the gas. So if you can say, well, I've got 6th grade level reading for you, I've got 8th grade level reading for you. We did get approved. This is a big issue for all of you back in September. Like, you are allowed to give students above level texts, above grade level texts, if you have a curricular purpose for it. You can't just say, oh, I love this book, I want you to read it. But if you can say, within my curriculum, this is approved by Michelle Jarrett, within my curriculum, I think you need to be reading at a 6th grade level text. Here's a book from the 6th grade curriculum. You're allowed to do that. So then I'm gonna give you more gas. You're gonna go, and then just think about what's the core learning. Like, you need to understand cause and effect. I can apply that to any book. Let's talk about what that means for you. Especially in reading, differentiation is often more needed, but it's also often easier to implement. You can sub out a text, you can sub out questions. You can always, whatever question you're asking, just ask the kid to like, what's next? You know, oh, this story, this happened and this happened. Why did that happen? And then you can say, what would have happened differently if the characters were different genders? What do you think happens next? Write the sequel to this story. Those kind of things are just real easy places to take beyond whatever they're doing. Let's get into the practice parallel. So 3rd of your 4 parallels, the parallel of practice. We ask students to become practitioners in different disciplines, to become historians, mathematicians, writers, scientists. You've probably been exposed to a lot of this because this is a really good practice. We usually say like what's good for gifted is good for everybody. It has been infused in a lot of other places. Your goal is to place students into the actual roles in the real world that would use the skills you're using, then tie an activity that person would do into your classroom. So think about what real world positions your kids might be interested in. We're going to ask them to understand the nature of a discipline, to define and assume a role, to comprehend the lives of professionals and function as a scholar and a producer of knowledge. The parallel of practice is not an exploration of careers. It is not, oh, go research what a lawyer does. It is an activity that makes them a lawyer, and then they have to do what a lawyer does. Thousands of jobs, millions of jobs, but just some ideas for you: travel agent, cartographer, journalist, attorney, graphic designer, artist, illustrator, teacher. That's a popular one for our kids. Parent, zoologist, engineer, environmental scientist, mathematician, political advisor, photographer, climatologist, immigrant, farmer, programmer. These are all real world things that you can put your kids into those positions. So some examples that have been done within our school district. You're an architect. You're going to build a model of your ideal building. So this kids are going to build 2D and 3D shapes for a castle. Nope. You, instead of this, an architect would draw blueprints that would be 2D but explain in 3 dimensions what the kid is doing. I'm going to make you an architect. I need you to draft a blueprint for me and then show me what you did. An engineer, you're going to use shapes to design roads, tunnels, bridges, other structures. That was from a kindergarten lesson. A lawyer, provide a scenario where students need to defend each other in court. A critic, you're going to write a review of this short story. Everyone else is going to read the short story and explain to me what happened. You're a professional critic. You're going to tell me if it's a good story or a bad story, and then write a review of it. I had one student who loved doing that. He did that for every single text in my class, and he would always say, like, Eliza Stapleton is the worst authoress to ever be written. That's why they teach her in high school English. Just like would really go in on these like very famous authors. Psychologists, have a group therapy session for your characters. Give me the transcript of the therapy session. A chef, you're going to create a recipe to put in a cookbook that includes the fractions for a halved recipe, a doubled recipe, a quadrupled recipe. A zoologist, you're going to talk about the sleeping habits of 4 different animals. You're going to talk about the time that they sleep in the day, time they eat, time they play. You're going to make me a pie chart that compares the representation. This is the kid who you're like, okay, today we're going to talk about wetlands and we're going to talk about, you know, crocodiles. And the kid's like, Miss, did you know that crocodiles have 2 sets of eyelids, that one they use to close over the other so that when they go under the water to hunt their prey, because they're only really hunting animals in the water, they can see what they're doing and they like to roll and keep them under the water, so rather suffocate their food because it's easier to eat rather than choking them or biting them. Like, yeah, okay, sure, That was I did that lesson at Highlands. I had a student who did that. So here was my lesson back at Liberty. Instead of analyzing Mark Anthony's speech, you're a politician. You're going to write an email that a politician would write about the speech writing process. You're going to talk to a politician and they're going to tell you, well, when I write speeches, here's what I do. I think about ethos, logos, and pathos. I try to find, this kid actually ended up analyzing the State of the Union, and he was like, did you know that in every State of the Union, they always bring up someone from like some state so that the president can point to them and then that person can cry on camera? I was like, okay, cool. Well, that's pathos. Instead of translating the Shakespeare's English to modern English, you're going to talk to a linguist about the philological movements to predict future slang terms. We talk about philology. That's the idea that words change over time, that they become different things. You know, the one I always like to bring up is like several is actually based on the Roman word for severe, so a lot rather than 7. And then instead of building a theme park, you're going to become a Disney PR person and talk about how we use rhetoric to bring people into our theme parks. What are we going to say about our rides to convince people to come to our theme parks? For that elementary one, instead of explaining cause and effect, you're going to talk to the police deputy on campus about why building relationships is important with your community. So taking that cause and effect within a community idea, putting it into practice. Instead of reading Ryan's Well and making a cause and effect map, you're going to become a fundraiser. You're going to talk about the promotional strategies you would use and how you're going to collect funds that goes with the text. And then for read tsunamis and hurricanes, instead of that, you're going to figure out what a FEMA specialist does about offering assistance to the hurricane victims. And then you're going to report that back to me. So your 2 activities, remember we're leaving that bottom one blank. Your 2 activities, go ahead and write practice roles, put the kids in a position, tell them what that person is going to do related to the core learning. 1. We're back up here. Does someone want to share what their core activity was and then the practice activity that they made off of it?
For the practice, the students designed their own intelligence test, taking that information into account.
Okay, so you're putting them in the role of like a education researcher or a psychologist. Okay, I like that a lot. Anyone else want to share? I know you all made them. I just came around and read all of them, so
I have
Sure.
one.
go for it.
Sure. So the core was analyze and interpret a metaphor since the students still struggling in metaphor instead of simile. And the practice that I wrote in here was to create different scenarios, which includes a metaphor involving animals, objects, and humans. But then we were speaking about AI chat. I entered in the chat and it mentions plenty of activities like metaphor mural, conceptual connections, metaphorical poetry. You say, oh my God, that sounds better than my own activity. So it can give you.
Well, we'll get to that. You're previewing the rest of the session. No, it's fine. I've got no issue with that. But think about in the practice, what are the jobs that might do that? So you talked about poetry. Well, now you're a poet. You need to write a poem that uses a metaphor. You want to take the core learning and infuse it into that you expect. You know the kid knows this. So now you want to exploit that knowledge. You're going to use this knowledge. Who else uses metaphors? A politician uses metaphors. You're going to film for me a little political speech, and you got to use 3 metaphors. Graphic designers use metaphors, visual metaphors. I want you to make an image that shows a metaphor. It's like, oh, a person is a rocket ship. They're blasting off, and like you're going to get better grades. Person like shooting off like a rocket, whatever. You want to infuse that into that, but with the practice parallel, you always want to tie it back to the job, because then that becomes your in for getting the kids to research. Kid says, I don't know what to do. And you say, well, it's a graphic designer. Okay, what does a graphic designer do? Well, I don't know. Great. We have the ability to know this. Activate that. Get on the internet, go to Google, type in what does a graphic designer do? Read the first 3 results that you get. And then go from there. Come back and tell me, look at some samples of graphic design. You'll start to notice a lot of overlap with the type 1 activities from the school-wide enrichment model, because that is when you think about the way human interest works, when you think about just how our brain works, it's, I don't know something, I want an answer. I got an answer, I'm interested, I want to know more. I learn more, I want to do something with it. I do something with it. That's the SEM, that's the PCM. It really should be the classroom in general, but you know, we get so caught up in, I need to make you learn this thing, that we forget that people are originally designed to want to learn things.
Make connections, write a new metaphor that can mean the same thing as the metaphor identified on the text.
Yeah.
And also create objects with the metaphor reading, the metaphor reading.
Yeah, I used to do that with fourth graders. The activity I loved with even more proficient fourth graders. I've given you this text, copied, I used like an OCR in Word to scan it into Word. I deleted all the metaphors and left in blanks. You need to put in new metaphors that tell the exact same story without, confusing the audience. But it can't be, he was a rocket ship flying into the sky. It's got to be something else. The kids go, oh, he was a racehorse going 1,000 miles an hour. Okay, that last parallel, the fourth parallel, is the identity parallel. The parallel of identity engages students at a personal level in their learning and gives individual meaning to the students. You want to think about how you can prompt kids to reflect on what they are learning, to examine their attitudes, their beliefs, their disposition, their life outlooks, goals, interests. In a word, metacognition. We want to tie all of this back to them as the learner. You're asking them to reflect on their skills and interests as they relate to their discipline, to think about the impact of a discipline on both themselves and the world, to understand how their own strengths and weaknesses relate to the characteristics of professionals. Here are some examples. Is this a career you would choose? Why or why not? That's sort of a different branch. The practice parallel would be, you're a reporter, you're doing this. The identity parallel, would you want to be a reporter? Why not? Explain to me what you may like or dislike about it. Who has been a hero for you? Why are they your hero? If you could be your favorite animal for a day, what would you be and why? Sort of an elementary one. If you could ever travel into space, if you had the opportunity to do so, why or why not? What qualities do you have that would make you a good astronomer? What was challenging? Why was it challenging? How do you want to improve? If you could be present for any event in history, which would it be? Would you choose to alter it? Why or why not? You're taking the kid and you are centering the curriculum around them. So here's some examples in this identity parallel. Instead of analyzing Mark Antony's speech for rhetoric, you could talk to me about how you can use rhetoric to get your parents to do the thing you want them to do. You want your parents to let you go to prom, even though you're only a sophomore, but you get to go because your boyfriend's a senior. Tell me how you're going to use your rhetoric, ethos, pathos, and logos to convince your parents to let you do that. I will say, unfortunately, she did end up going to prom with that senior. Translate Shakespeare's speech to modern English. Do you use slang daily? Why? What led to you adopting these patterns of, speech? Build a theme park that uses literary devices instead. If you had grown up in Caesar's time, how would his death have affected you? Would you have sided with Brutus or Mark Antony? This took the core learnings, that is, the kids need to understand the literary devices about what happened in this text, and centered it around them. It's a totally different activity, but it still gets, for me, at the same instructional learning objective for the kid. Now, critically, when I handed this, I had about 3 students who used this in that classroom. When I handed this to them, I said, today we're doing this. You can do this if it interests you. I'm not going to block you from doing that. But if it sounds boring, you're allowed to do this, or this, or this. Which one do you want to do? Obviously, the first question that they always ask me is, well, which one is the easiest? And I'd say, well, honestly, this one's probably the easiest, but this one's probably the most interesting. And they would take it from there. You don't want it to be generally, you can kind of make it work if you want to, but I would not say, oh, you can do this and this. You want it to be the same amount of work, just different work instead of what everyone in the class is doing. That's the differentiation. For that elementary one, explaining the cause and effect of the relationship within your community. you would be, as a community leader, who are liaisons between the county and citizens, talk about your expectations and goals and map a way to achieve them. So again, you're centered in that. It's different from the practice parallel because it's more, oh, all these people would be doing this thing. How would you be involved in it? Instead of reading Ryan's well, you're going to develop a program to create awareness in your community about sanitation and hygiene. And for reading Tsunamis by Tim Brown, we're going to talk about how you can use your knowledge to engage your community to be proactive for a natural disaster. Some of these could easily become type 3 activities. In an enrichment group, they could become type 2 activities, but in the PCM, it's that instead of. So now you're going to try on your foldable, write some identity parallels. I'm going to give you a bit of extra time on this one to go back, adjust what you've got. Okay, so putting that student into it, would you want to be involved in this? Yes or no? Why? You know, that's going to be dark. But I'm sure you'll have some kids that'll connect with that. Anyone else want to share? Go ahead.
Reflect about how can you now recognize a metaphor on a text based on the features, keywords.
Okay, so asking that student to apply the skills, how can you recognize when a metaphor is happening?
And then the practice will be the architect student will create an ideal drone that will support scientists, not only with the whales, they can see any animals from the sea. And then the identify will be what was challenging about creating a specific drone that will help in different areas of science. You know, so normally the animals could be any subject that you like about science, and we talked about a lot of the kids love science.
Sure.
So that will maybe explore in that or give them that creativity in just looking at the
That's good. Let's tweak that a little with identity. Maybe ask what would be challenging about making drones in general. The one thing that you want to be careful about with these are not building off of each other. They're not linked. You don't want to say, hey, you did this practice, now let's reflect. This should be its own activity that they do instead of. The idea is that you're offering 4 parallels. Here's 4 things you can do. You pick one. So that identity, the goal of it is for you to center the learning around the kids themselves, but it should be an instead of those other things. So you kind of extended that practice with a reflection question. Instead, it should be just, you could start from here. Up to you. That's up to you. The value in the parallel curriculum model, in being able to differentiate in this manner, is that you're still doing the same core learning. You can immediately jump off of there. Chris, you go. And then you can go anywhere from there. But we generally still want to be getting to the same essential learning, same learning objective. We're just ascending that intellectual demand to meet them at a level that challenges them and interests them. You remember we talked, if you all remember, January of 2023, we talked about that zone of proximal development where that ideal level of challenges, Lev Vygotsky, his work, his grad student's work, whatever, his work, that you need to have, if you have too little challenge, you're going to be bored. And if you have too much challenge, you're going to walk away from it. So that ideal level of challenge. This assumes that this task is not challenging enough. So we need to ascend to the challenge, give them something else that's going to engage that student. Okay, so we talk about you make your lesson plans, and now you're going to make 3 more lesson plans on top of it. What's your first thing that you're going to say to me after that? So I don't have time for this. Right? I don't have time to do this. So that's where what I say to you is that we need to stop being humans and become cyborgs. So what is a cyborg? A cyborg is a person whose physical abilities are extended beyond normal human limitations by mechanical elements. It can be done. You can take all your lesson plans, make a parallel curriculum model unit every single day, give it to your kids. I used to do that. It would be at the end of the day when I was writing my lesson plan for the next day. I mean, I did it for the whole week, but as I was actually fleshing it out and figuring out I'm going to do this at this point, and this point, and this point, I would make that little strip. I would cut it out and I would give it to my students, say, here's the activity, pick any one of these four for you to go on. Everyone else is doing the leftmost activity. I will tell you, you know, when I had been doing it for a couple of years, I'm talking 5 to 10 minutes a day on top of my lesson plans. That adds up. That's an extra hour a week. That's a lot. It's very difficult. It doesn't have to be if you use mechanical aids, right? If you become a robot. And I like to say, you know, a fully human teacher dealing with the kind of, this is actually a light workload for an Osceola teacher, but that is what we're dealing with. So to become a cyborg, we need to use the power of AI. We need to use large language models like ChatGPT to offload the cognitive burden of the parallel curriculum model. It's really not a lot of physical work. When we're talking about it, you wrote what, 3 sentences, 4 sentences? It's not hard. The hard part is sitting there and thinking, if everyone is doing this, how could I draw these connections together to make something worthy of my students' time that's going to have them thinking on this, that's not going to be just an activity for the sake of activity? That is a huge cognitive burden. And that is the part that we can offload. When you're talking like the physical activity, like it's probably the same amount of typing to use the AI as it is to type it in a Word document, but we're going to erase that thinking. Okay, and to implement this, you're going to need 3 things. First, you're going to need your core activity. You need to know what kids are already doing. Second, you need to know what your kids are interested in. And third, you're going to need some language for prompting the AI, which I'm going to give you some sentence frames to begin with. And when we're talking about thinking about prompting into an AI, we have 2 real ways of doing this for these purposes. The first is generative prompts, and the second is elaborative prompts. You're going to talk to the machine in different ways here. A generative prompt is going to be, I don't know what to do, give me some ideas. An elaborative prompt is, I already had an idea, make this something I can work with. Okay, so here is your prompts that you're going to put into the AI as you become a cyborg. So a generative prompt would be, my students are learning about whatever we're talking about. Can you give me an idea for 5 activities with this topic using the parallel of connections from the parallel curriculum model? So you're going to tell the AI, and I have checked ChatGPT 3.5 understands the parallel curriculum model very well. It will tell you all about Caroline Tomlinson and the team that built it and what all those parallels are. It understands it. ChatGPT 4, which is the paid version, understands it way better, but also it costs $20 a month. So I'm not advising any of you to do that. 3.5 will work just fine. I am doing this. Give me ideas for this. You can copy that prompt. Give me ideas for the parallel of practice. Give me ideas for the parallel of identity. But I would focus on one parallel because it will give you a better response. If you ask it about all of the parallels, it's going to summarize to produce less text. It's going to give you less stuff to work with coming out of it. An elaborative framework is going to be, my students are learning about this activity. They are interested in this topic. Can you give me an activity from the curriculum of connections from the parallel curriculum model? This right here is what we call a memory store variable. We are telling it, hey, my kids like Fortnite. And it's going to remember that when it answers your question, and it's going to give you a question that uses Fortnite in its response. So it's really critical. You don't have to tell it, oh, can you make an activity that uses the thing that they like? It will remember that. It will say, you told me this for a reason, and it will kick that back out to you. So let's look at what a cyborg teacher might do. My students are learning about fractions. Can you give me ideas for 5 activities with this topic using the curriculum of connections from the parallel curriculum model? I put this into ChatGPT yesterday, and here's what it said. That sounds like a great idea to engage your students with fractions. Oh, thanks, ChatGPT. You make me feel so good about my skills. Using the parallel curriculum model, which emphasizes making connections to various disciplines, here's an activity. Fraction city planning. Students will apply their understanding of fractions to design a city layout, connecting their knowledge to urban planning and geometry. There's a lot more. I cut down to just the part that I'm going to pull out and use in the PCM. I don't need to give kids this whole It gave me like a attention grabber for the start of a lesson. That's fine. I'm not teaching it. What I am going to give this kid is you're going to use a ruler to divide your graph paper into sections that represent fractions, then calculate how many squares are needed for each section of your city. And you're going to tell me what fraction of your city is businesses, is residential, etc. And then here's if I want them to present it, students will present their designs, talk about the fractions that they used in that process. So that is a generative prompt. It gave me a bunch of other activities. This is just the one that I pulled out to use. When I handed it to my kid, here's a connections activity. Elaborative prompt, I already know a little bit of information. My kids are learning about motifs and they like Fortnite. Can you write me an activity using the curriculum of identity from the parallel curriculum model? Absolutely. Linking motifs to something like Fortnite can make learning engaging. Here's how you could structure this activity with a focus on the curriculum of identity. Your kids are going to use the concept of motifs through the lens of identity as represented in Fortnite, examining recurring elements that contribute to the game's culture. Have students identify and list common motifs, such as the visual motifs in skins, certain colors, symbols, and themes, audio motifs or music that appear throughout the course of their gameplay, or action motifs. Where do you see similarities between the dances and emotes as they go? I could give that to a kid and they will go for an entire day. And at the end of it, all I need to do is say, well, how are any of these motifs? That requires, I know that the kid knows what a motif is. I diagnosed them at the beginning. I asked what was the motif of the text a couple days ago. They perfectly identified it. I don't need to teach them, sit with the rest of the class and say, okay, do we notice that the color green has appeared 9 times on this page? As Les Mis was one that was always like, did you see the silver candlesticks? Like 15 times. He walked by the silver candlesticks. He stopped. He thought about the silver candlesticks. What's he thinking about? Remember, they were given to him. He was freed. Silver is freedom. Kid understood that. Now I'm giving them this. They're going to extend upon that essential learning and then come back to me and tell me, oh my God, I found a million motifs. Did you know that Fortnite uses the color purple more than any other color? So that is that. Let's take that into ChatGPT. You have a device. You left a space with one of your core activities for the connection, for the practice, for the identity parallel. So I want you to go into ChatGPT and try this. I am going to do one for you right here, wherever I put ChatGPT. Let's exit from this.
In the store.
In the general, well, that's up to you, but it works in a general browser just fine. So, let me drag this over so you can all see it. Here we go. Let me reshare my screen so that it is showing ChatGPT for the recording. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to take my generative prompt. Somebody give me an idea. What are you teaching about? What are you teaching about? Yeah, I tell it hello to see if I was logged in or if it logged me out. But. Okay, my students are learning about fractions. So instead of parallel of connections, let's talk about the parallel of practice. Or, sorry, use the curriculum of practice term. Curriculum of practice in the parallel curriculum model. And it's going to kick out for me. Here we go. Designed to enrich students' learning experiences. Fantastic way to teach fractions. Let's do a recipe conversion challenge. That's going to be the one that I copied and pasted earlier in the presentation. Oh, yeah?
They took our lesson.
Well, remember, large learning models are built on all the knowledge that's been fed into them, so you're going to see things that you're familiar with coming out. Great minds. Okay. Have students create a model structure representing a fraction using Legos. That right there is already an activity that we can do. Budget planning, when we talk about what might a financial planner do, you're going to become a financial planner, set up a budget. You're going to be a personal fitness coach, and you're going to help someone figure out how to spend a 30-minute routine so that they have 6 different activities, each of which are 1/6 of their time. Takes that knowledge of fractions, immediately uses it in something else that is more intellectually challenging. So you all have access to ChatGPT. It's free. Go ahead. I'm gonna pop back over to the prompts so that you can see them. And so you can use these prompts, talk to ChatGPT. Remember, you're going to do 3 of these because you've got 3 different curriculums that you're working in, and then figure out what does ChatGPT recommend. We're back up here. So hopefully with this, you can start to see how these AIs can be a tool for you to use in the classroom. This idea of you becoming a cyborg, I know it sounds funny and I like saying it, but the idea is that you will get mechanical aid that makes it so that you can work much faster, much more efficiently. With AIs, what we need to be teaching our students is not that these exist to do the work for you. That is not where we want to take this in the future. What we want is for you to be able to do much more work faster at a higher quality. In its best implementation, these work like thought partners. Imagine if you had another teacher in the classroom who you could talk to and bounce ideas off of, who could say, did you think about this? What about this? Oh, you want to do that? Have you thought about this? I know this strategy. That would be super beneficial. It's why we do PLCs. You have the ability to, anytime you have a thought, have that bounce back without having to walk down the hallway, wait for them to, dismiss Johnny to the nurse's office, take 3 seconds at the door. What do you want to? Okay, no, try a ThinkPad share, and then walk back to your classroom. This will really empower you, in my opinion, to effectively implement these tasks that take time. And hopefully, as you learn how to use them, you're going to find all sorts of ways that you can really continue on your work. You may have noticed along the way that some of these pictures were pretty targeted at exactly what I was talking about. All of these I asked ChatGPT to make for me. I did mix a couple real pictures in. Let's